Well, good morning. This is Dick Black, and it is Monday, July 3rd. And so I know many of you have been celebrating the 4th of July, even though it was early. So I hope that you had a very good weekend. And if you're continuing the celebrations, I hope they're good ones. It's a great time to kind of take a break and get away. But today, what we're going to do, this, in addition to the 4th of July, as I was driving through the countryside, we had all the American flags, the red, white, and blue was all over, but also in some places, particularly in the towns, there were these rainbow flags, and it's a very sad thing to see those intermingled with the American flag. But in any event, what we're going to do is we're going to do a little bit of a wrap up on this very sorry Pride Month we've had. Now, there is no such thing as a Pride Month or a Pride Day or anything like that. There are people who would like to have one, including, our president and a number of people in his party. There might be some Republicans who like it also. But in any event, let's just do a little bit of a recap and look at some of the things. This has been a very, very bad month for the I don't know whether queer, bisexual, transgender, unicorn. I don't know what all they've got now, but in any event, they have acquired just gargantuan amounts of power throughout the Western world, and they, in some places, in some countries, it's even a crime to speak out against them and to criticize them in some ways. So it really was a very tyrannical movement that started with the U.S. Supreme Court. Up until then, we managed to suppress the outward display of homosexuality in public, molestation of children, and that kind of thing. And now the whole system was broken down by the U.S. Supreme Court with a series of rulings. But in any event, so they have become immensely powerful to where now their flag is starting to displace the American flag at some homes on the 4th of July. So let's run through, because I think to some extent the good news for those who love freedom and who love equal treatment under the law and that kind of thing, the best thing in the world that can happen is things that will put a damper on this big drive to homosexualize the culture. Well, one of the biggest, kind of one of the most amazing stories is what happened to Bud Light. Bud Light has become just an anathema to the beer drinking public. Their clientele consisted of typically, people who were sort of rural, down home people, and all of a sudden they have this guy. His name is Dylan Mulvaney. He dresses up like a girl. He wears lipstick, puts on a dress, and so Bud Light started prompting him. Okay, this is the face of Bud Light. If you drink Bud Light, then you're like a lover of guys who wear dresses. That's not what they said, but that's the way a lot of people interpreted it. And you have a lot of normal guys, and the last thing on earth that they want is for somebody to think that they're attracted to another man wearing a dress. So in any event, you've got this this tremendous public relations backlash. I've never seen a backlash against any product that I can remember that was as severe and long lasting. I think it's taken all of the marketing professionals off guard. All of them uniformly predicted, okay, this is just going to blow over. Give it a month, maybe they'll take a hit, but it'll be finished. It's beginning to look like there's been permanent damage done to the Bud Light name. I don't know. It's probably going a little extreme to say that over time you may just see the name disappear, because they've lost not quite a third of their market share, but it's an enormous amount that they have lost. So, it's probably going overboard, a little over the top to speculate that they might eventually have to drop the name completely. But in any event, the Anheuser-Busch, which owns the Bud Light name, apparently they've lost about $20 billion in market capitalization. And anyway, the stories just keep coming out and coming out. So anyway, so that was quite a disaster for the trans movement. During the last year, we also had the law passed in Uganda, which imposes the death penalty for aggravated homosexuality. Now, what is aggravated homosexuality? Well, it's a number of things that tend towards really forcible sodomy, and probably the most common area affected will be the forcible anal rape of little boys. That is when you're going to see the potential for the death penalty being imposed. Now, Ted Cruz surprised everybody by saying that this law of Uganda's was an abomination, and that they had, it was just abhorrent to make sodomy illegal. And Ted Cruz then got some backlash from the Christians who said, what? This is Ted Cruz? This is a guy that I supported. I personally supported Ted Cruz back when he was running in 2016. Now, I immediately jumped on board with Trump afterwards and worked very hard for him. But in any event, Ted Cruz sort of postures himself as this Christian. And anyway, Ted Cruz has gotten in a big back and forth with theological Christian leaders. And Ted Cruz, he made, here's a quote from him as he's defending himself against the backlash. He says, we're talking about the laws of man, not the Old Testament laws of God. Do you really believe the U.S. government should execute every person who is gay? And then he proceeded to run through a series of Old Testament laws that he disagreed with. Well, the pastor he was debating back and forth with never said that he believed that the U.S. government should execute every person who is gay. And nobody in Uganda has ever said that Uganda should execute every person who is gay. They haven't. And he knows that. Ted Cruz, he's a very smart guy. He's a very smart guy, very cunning, very opportunistic kind of guy, I'm afraid. But anyway, the pastor came back, and without going into the whole thing, he basically said, look, he said, here's what God said. He said, for you to say that it's abhorrent and immoral and all this stuff, he says, it's one thing if you disagree with the Uganda law, but to say that this particular, you're basically taking on God. You're undermining God. Anyway, it's an interesting back and forth. So you can see that the homosexual advocates, including Ted Cruz, are sort of put on the back foot a little bit for the first time, because this, we've been under this tyranny of this minority now for quite a number of years. And anyway, it's starting to come to a head. The Supreme Court, when it wrapped up all of its work for this term, one of the cases that they came up with, or that they published, I should say, was called 303 Creative versus Elenis. And this was a case where there was a woman named Lori Smith, and she designs websites for weddings. So if you're getting a wedding, you go and you get a website, and then you can, post things to it and that kind of thing. Well, she refused to do that for same-sex couples. So we had two men who have a marriage based on sodomy. She's just not going to do that. She's a Christian, and so it's hard to believe this. Here we've got a country that was founded on freedom and liberty. We talk about the Liberty Tree and all of this kind of the Liberty Bell. And yet we now are so dominated by government that you actually can have the government come in and even consider, well, in fact, in Colorado, the government did say that you have to apply your artistic creative talents of creating a website, and you have to make this website for homosexuals who are promoting sodomy, which is absolutely forbidden in the Christian faith, in the Islamic faith, and in most faiths, I think. And the very notion that the state of Colorado could subject people to penalties, to civil fines, really harsh fines for doing nothing. It's not that they did something affirmative. It's that they refused to engage in promoting sodomy. It's just stunning. I tell you, we never would have had a United States. There never would have been a declaration, and there never would have been a Constitution ratified on July the 4th if the founders had known that someday Americans would be subjected to a level of tyranny that the colonists never could have conceived of with the King of England. The King of England never would have said, okay, you have to go out and you have to create something to advertise sodomy. It just, believe me, there never would have been a constitutional convention, because no state, I shouldn't have called them state, no colony would have sent a representative. Well, no, I guess they were states by this time. No state would have sent delegates to amend the Articles of Confederation as they did, which led to the creation of the United States. But in any event, Creative versus Elenis was a setback for the homosexuals, because it says that the First Amendment says that you cannot compel people to create things for the cause of homosexuality, basically. And they're talking about things like photographers, videographers, artists, and writers. Unbelievable that we've gotten to the point where you have to have that, and that's viewed as a setback for the homosexual community, but it was. I'm not going to go into any great detail, but of course, this past month, you've seen just endless stories about school board uprisings across the United States where parents continue. This is not a flash in the pan. Parents are dead serious about protecting their children from homosexual grooming in the public schools, and they continue to rally, to talk, and school's not even in session right now. So you can imagine what's going to happen when the next school year starts. Well, I want to focus just a little bit on the gay pride parades. There's some very, very interesting video that's making the rounds. I'm not going to display it. I thought about doing it, and I thought it's really just so sickening to look at the mobs of perverse people that are exposing parts of their body and that kind of thing. I'm just not going to do it. We'll have, at some point here, we'll have a photo that will be displayed. It's not that kind of sexually graphic thing. But in any event, there were people marching in the New York City in it's a New York City drag march. Now, drag is where you have homosexual men who dress as women or vice versa. And in any event, they're out there delirious with drugs, with liquor, with just the idea that they can expose themselves in public, and that they can join with other people who are utterly sexually decadent and screwed up in every which way. But in any event, while the rest of us were out celebrating 4th of July, these folks were there up in the New York City drag march. And you had just this massive crowd of drag queens and delirious revelers parading through Manhattan's West Village, wearing very bizarre costumes, makeup. You have men with lipstick and rouge and all kinds of stuff. And they were marching through the city, and they were saying, "We're here, we're queer, and we're coming for your children. We're here, we're queer, we're coming for your children." Now, there's a lot of back and forth in the media about, well, what does this mean, we're coming for your children? Was it just some momentary weird thing that happened? Well, I'm going to tell you, I worked very hard in the Pentagon back when Bill Clinton was first elected president, and his number one campaign promise was to put notorious homosexuals in uniform, which was opposed by over 98% of all the generals and admirals in the Department of Defense. And so I ended up studying homosexuality, what were all the implications and so forth. And so I'm very familiar with the community. I spent many months working on this, and eventually we defeated Bill Clinton, and he was not able to put homosexuals into uniform. The purpose of doing that, first and foremost, was to create a wedge, because people have respect for the military, and if the military says it's okay, well, maybe it's okay. That was the objective. The generals in the Pentagon knew that. They knew it was designed to undermine American culture by introducing homosexuality everywhere in the schools and so forth. Well, one of the things that I recall hearing is you would have this National Man-Boy Love Association, NAMBLA, and they would be present at all of these rallies, and they advocated sodomy, having sexual relations, unnatural sexual relations between adult men and little boys, and this is that really is what they were founded on, the National Man-Boy Love Association. It was sex between grown men and little boys, and so yes, and we have Stephen Prince, who mentions that the embassies and consulates have pride flags on display now, and this is true. I think Tony Blinken issued some sort of an edict. I don't know whether it required the flag to be flown everywhere or whether it allowed it, and then they all show it. So it's kind of an in-your-face to every country that protects its children. And in any event, thank you for that, Stephen. But in any event, so this idea of we're here, we're queer, we're coming for your children, the homosexual community has as one of its foundational elements, and I'm not talking about a philosophy, I'm talking about a culture, a way of life, and pedophilia is a fundamental part of homosexuality. It is an integral part. It's not just some weird, lawless group. It is woven throughout the culture, and people are starting to reconnect and say, "Oh, wait a minute. Okay, I guess the fact that this has been recognized since biblical times, and certainly way before biblical times, it's just the Bible happened to record it. The Quran records it, but this is not a new thing. This idea that child molestation is just an open part of homosexual activities. So anyway, that caused quite an outrage, and I would just comment that Hollywood has spent really several decades now doing these very benign portrayals of homosexuals, and but despite those benign portrayals, the deep involvement of pedophilia has been documented since biblical times. The public, the chant, "We're here, we're queer, we're coming for your kids." It was being used at least 30 years ago when I was studying the gays in the military. So, when I was a kid, parents used to warn their children. Now, culture was not as direct today. It was much more courteous, much more. You said things and people understood that there was something you needed to watch out for. So parents would warn their children. They said, "Look, if you go in the bathroom and there's somebody who seems unusual in there, you get out. You go." You're talking about a public bathroom, and you kind of understood from a very early age that, okay, they're men who go in the bathrooms who molest little boys, and they're not so much on the women's side, but with the boys, has always been a huge problem. So, and the problem this creates is that back when you had this, when parents would inform their children that you got to be careful, watch out, avoid this, there was a level of protection because children were on their guard. We're doing just the opposite now with this massive campaign of homosexual grooming that has almost become a part of the required curriculum. And because of that, the whole purpose of the grooming in the public schools is to lower a child's natural resistance to advances by pedophiles. That's the purpose of, and our public schools are doing it, for crying out loud. Let's see, I've got something from Steve Prince again, which is interesting. He says, if I'm not wrong, President Biden signed an executive order requiring the pride flag. Now, I can't tell you whether that's true or not, but it wouldn't be too surprising. Thank you for that, Steve. Well, in any event, let's see. We had an image that we were going to put up. Jose, I don't know whether you have that. One of our. Okay, here's a picture of one of the people who's conducting the Drag Queen Story Hour. These are children's storybooks that are read to little children, and you can see some of the ones in the foreground of the picture. Now, imagine, there's some children who develop a phobia to clowns because the clown is all painted up and kind of icky looking. Now, most of us just sort of laugh it off, but some people have a lifelong phobia because of the strange appearance of a clown. Imagine if you are a child, a little child like these, and you have a man who comes into your room and you have to sit there. You're forced, you are compelled to sit there and listen to this man who has this hideous appearance with spikes growing out of his head and all of this bizarre makeup. And he's wearing a dress. And he's reading to you about how Heather has two mommies, gender queer. I don't know what this person read, but typically they have some sort of sexually suggestive books, something that talks about the relationship of men and boys or women, girls. And I would imagine that for a lot of children, seeing someone with that shocking kind of appearance, it will probably cause a lifelong fear and sort of nightmares that go on throughout life. So I think it's kind of hard to believe that we've gotten to this point. But I think the good news is that more people are recognizing it. Now, here's something from Julie Kay, who says, when you see articles about drag queens and politicians, you know you have an administration that is in trouble. They are distracting you from the issues that are really important to people. I think it is true that there are many very important issues that are being driven from the news by things like these. But I think it's important to recognize too that a nation thrives or falls based on its culture. We look back to Rome, and when I was a child, they used to talk about the rise and fall of the Roman Empire because, in many ways, we we came. That was our great grandparents was the Roman Senate, and Rome did not fall. It was never defeated militarily. Rome fell because it had originally had a powerful culture. It was very stoic. It was very disciplined. It was very orderly. And gradually you had this erosion of the rule of law. You had the rule of Caligula. Caligula, he was known for just his outrageous decadence. He raped several of his sisters. Caligula would have been right at home in today's America. Well, of course, once you give up your sexual culture and the order and discipline that provides protection for children, protects women from rapists and so forth, then anything goes. And at that point, other cultures, which are much stronger and stoic, begin to encroach. Now, also in Rome, I think it was Gibbons who wrote the great epic, The Rise and Fall of the Roman Empire. And I believe he's the one who said that it wasn't an invading army that conquered Rome. It was, the barbarians walking across the borders and just coming in. Well, does that have any relationship to today's America, where we lack the moral strength, the cultural strength to do things that are required to make a great nation function in the long run? Things like being responsible with your finances. We just print money like it's going out of style today, because it doesn't matter. There is no responsibility. There is no responsibility for obeying the law. We've got people at the very top of the federal government who they defy the law. They don't care. You want to take payoffs. You want to, you could be recorded, on tape, taking bribes from people. It doesn't matter. What's the difference? This is America. Anything goes. You can molest children in the public schools. It doesn't matter. There was just an article that's come out, and it says that there was an investigation done in a college up in Maryland, and the instructor ordered all of the women in the classroom to remove their blouses and to stand there in their bra. Now, I hearken back to an earlier time. If that had happened in one of our classrooms, now the culture of the time, and I grew up in Miami, Florida. The culture of the time was that, teachers were absolutely untouchable. I never heard of anybody touching a teacher, not because they feared it, just because we had a strong moral culture. And but I will tell you this: we also had a culture that never would have allowed a man to order girls to remove their blouses. Now, this particular college, this is a college professor in the state of Maryland, and he ordered them to take off their blouses, to stand up so that he could assess their bodies. And basically, he would say, well, you're too fat, or your breasts are too much this way or that way. Or I'm going to tell you, if this had happened in Miami High School, say, or at University of Miami, even when I started off at University of Miami initially, I think you'd have had young men, whether they were teenagers in high school or whether they were young men at college, who would have jumped up and gone to that professor and just knocked his teeth out. I'm serious. That guy would have been having difficulty crawling out of that classroom. Apparently, from what I can tell, the women stood up and took off their blouses. Now, it's just stunning, the level of moral decadence. And it wouldn't have happened were it not for past decisions of the U.S. Supreme Court that had no foundation whatsoever in the law or Constitution of the United States of America. It was a case of the Supreme Court simply making up a law to say, okay, we're going to have same-sex marriage, even though it's never existed in human history. The Constitution somehow said that we've got to have it. That's garbage. That's rubbish. There's no basis for it whatsoever, but you can look and see where it has led us on a path of decadence. But I don't want to just leave that the idea that somehow there is no hope, because there really is. And let me just touch one more thing. We've got Steve has commented once again, and he says that it's not a fringe issue. He said 1% of people are trans. That's over 90 million people in the United States and 2.4 billion people worldwide. I'm not sure that of the math, but this transgenderism has, in normal societies, whether they are moral, immoral, in societies where you don't have the government promoting transgenderism, you have a small segment of the homosexual community. Over hundreds of years, homosexuals have amounted to somewhere around 2.5 or 3% of the population overall. Of those, a very, very small segment are cross-dressers. Herbert Hoover, or no, I'm sorry, the founder of the FBI. I'm sorry. Name escapes me this moment, but anyway, the first director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation was transgender, but he did it in a very discreet, remote way rather than being in your face. So in any event, we do have this going on. But I think the good news is that we've reached a point where people seem to be saying enough is enough. And I don't think it's a flash in the pan. I think there is a cultural backlash. We'll see whether it's possible to go far enough to return us back to a more civilized culture. But you can see in Russia, they have clamped down on homosexual behavior and that type of thing. You can't have homosexuals adopt children in Russia. You cannot promote homosexuality either among children or adults. A very, very positive thing. And I think there are some of the East European countries that are on a similar track. Throughout Africa, there's a tremendous movement to clamp down on homosexual behavior. So you have a lot of very positive things taking place, and the movement to push the homosexual grooming out of the public schools is really, it's exciting. It is a hopeful sign for America. And so with that, I'm going to sign off at this point and just tell you that I am very excited about the direction that things are taking. I think that I love this country, and I think that it has great things in store for us. If we can have one reasonably honest election, I think people are going to take back their government and do what's right. We'll hope, we'll pray, and we'll work to see if we can bring that about. Thank you very much for being with us, and we will see you again next Monday.